Hello everyone. Welcome to Mind Podcast Buddhism, the best channel for sharing knowledge about Buddhism. Today we will talk about the topic, mindfulness of right livelihood. Accepting that our work is an aspect of our spiritual practice is not easy. Many people separate their work from their spiritual life. However, when we sit down to meditate and reflect on our past actions, we must acknowledge that our work is indeed our action, even if it is done under orders or job requirements. Let's explore how our jobs can align with our spiritual goals and the principles of right livelihood. The secret the Buddha revealed when choosing a profession. One of my disciples told a story about a successful businesswoman who was very interested in Buddhist ethical precepts. Once she found a new business opportunity, several liquor stores were up for sale. She knew that if she took this chance to buy the stores, she could make a lot of profit. However, something held her back. When she contemplated the business of selling alcohol, she realized that some customers might be harmed. They might drink and then do harmful things. They might become heavy drinkers or worse, addicts. To protect her spiritual development, she decided not to buy the stores and passed up the business opportunity. This story highlights a clear truth. Our means of livelihood should not hinder our spiritual development. We cannot list all the professions or jobs considered daily right livelihood, but the Buddha gave us a basic guideline. Any work or profession can be considered right livelihood if it does not cause harm to the person doing the work or to anyone else. Of course, nothing is perfect. The only perfectly right livelihood is work done by a perfect person, one who has completely eradicated all greed, hatred, and delusion. But those of us still on the path to perfection can do much to align our work with our spiritual lives. As with most questions about Buddhist ethics, the reason why we should be concerned with right livelihood has two sides. Work that harms others is inherently wrong because it violates basic ethical principles, but it is also wrong because it harms the person doing the work. Since we are not yet enlightened, we cannot completely avoid being affected by anger or suffering. Meanwhile, the work we do may cause us to struggle with greed and anger. However, we can choose to avoid work that hinders our spiritual progress. If our job causes too much anger, our mind cannot be calm enough to meditate. Consider a very clear example. Suppose a person's job requires him to kill animals. He might be a researcher who has to test new drugs on lab mice, or he might be a fish or pork butcher. When this person meditates, his mind might be disturbed. Every day, he witnesses animals suffering at his hands. He sees the fear in their eyes and their struggle to escape danger. He hears their cries and feels their pain. These images haunt him when he returns home. To do this job, he must deceive himself into thinking that animals do not have feelings, that they are not really sentient beings who experience pain like he does. Deep down, he knows this thought is false, but he continues to kill because it is his job. This inner conflict agitates his mind, and gruesome images appear when he meditates. He cannot practice compassion. He cannot relax. Clearly, this person's job is not right livelihood. For some jobs, like killing animals, it is easy to see they are bad. For others, evaluating what constitutes right livelihood can be much more complex. Some jobs may be acceptable in one place, but not in another, depending on circumstances, such as whether an employer requires employees to act unethically. Considering the following three levels can help us decide whether a job is considered right livelihood or not. Questions to assess right livelihood. We can determine whether a job is considered right livelihood by asking ourselves three interrelated questions. First, is my job inherently wrong? That is, by definition, is the job wrong? Does it involve the production, sale, advertisement, or use of guns or other weapons? Does it involve poisons or addictive substances? Does it cause harm or death to living beings? The Buddha explicitly taught that occupations involving weapons, poisons, or killing are clearly not right livelihood. Many occupations clearly fall into this category. For example, researching and developing chemical or nuclear weapons, producing or selling pesticides, setting up networks to guide missile launches, or exploiting cheap labor are obviously wrong. I could also add that writing for tabloids that harm the reputation of celebrities or working for online programs that spread hateful speech should be considered a type of poison. as mentioned by the Buddha, as a wrong way of earning a living. The Buddha's teaching can be broadly applied to include non-traditional occupations. Earning a living from violent sports that cause injuries, such as boxing, is a wrong livelihood. Owning or working in casinos or gambling establishments is similar. Like alcohol, gambling can lead to addiction. It arises from greed and often leads to crime or harm to innocent people. Needless to say, criminal activities in any form, including speculation, illegal transactions, fraud, deception, and corporate crime, are wrong livelihoods. Occupations that endanger the health of the person themselves are also wrong livelihoods. Drug trafficking falls into the category of dealing in poisons. Drug dealers are notorious for their violent actions and bribery to protect their territories and avoid arrest. Certainly, their activities bring disaster to the weak who fall into buying and using drugs. Drug users also commit crimes to get money for drugs. Innocent family members suffer from domestic violence, deprivation, poverty, and the loss of loved ones to prison or harm. However, as our economic system has become too complex, sometimes determining what occupations are considered wrong livelihood is not straightforward. For example, is working for the military always wrong? It depends. If the job puts the person in a position to use weapons, including using computers to launch missiles, it may be considered wrong livelihood. But being a doctor or a cook does not have anything inherently wrong. I find it hard to believe that any cook, even in the military, would think, I am cooking for these soldiers so they can go kill. Other work situations must also be considered. For instance, manufacturing nuclear warheads is clearly one of the forbidden jobs according to the Buddha's list. But what about mining uranium for use in nuclear weapons? Or working in grocery stores where the majority of the revenue comes from selling guns? Or working for low wages in fast food restaurants? We can think of many work situations that indirectly harm others. A university professor might feel uneasy if his scientific research is used for military purposes. A steelworker's product might be used to make hunting rifles. In such cases, we need to ask ourselves, is my job directly related to weapons, poisons, or killing? Am I intentionally causing harm to others or myself? In summary, we can use the following general rule. The greater the separation between the work we do and the harm it can cause to others, the less likely it is to be a job incompatible with right livelihood. Second, does my job cause me to break the 5 precepts? If a profession passes the first test, then consider whether the work might make it easy to break any of the 5 precepts of right conduct. Ethical standards at our workplace can also turn a normal job into a wrong livelihood. For example, in one law firm, lawyers may be encouraged to maintain the highest ethical standards. In another law firm, colleagues may be pressured to fabricate evidence, deceive the jury, or overcharge clients. Engaging in such unethical actions at work makes our minds agitated, hindering our spiritual progress. I remember a lawyer who often came to Bhavana Society. During meditation, he would cry continuously. I wondered if his suffering was due to having done something wrong to win a court case. Similarly, there are cases where the job is good, but the person doing the job turns it bad. For example, an officer responsible for issuing driver's licenses can work conscientiously, strictly and carefully, refusing to accept bribes. But another person in the same job, in the same office, might become corrupt and accept bribes. A corrupt official cannot have right livelihood, but an honest one can. Any job, even a good one, can be corrupted. I know a doctor in Malaysia who routinely gave fake medical certificates to workers for a fee of about $5 per day off. This habit became so ingrained that when a patient entered his office, the first question he asked was, "How many days?" A famous Jataka tale about the Buddha and his malevolent cousin Devadatta speaks of 2 people in the same profession, but only one following right livelihood. In a past life, the future Devadatta first bore a grudge against the Buddha when the Bodhisattvas, the future Buddhas, honest business dealings caused Devadatta to lose a transaction. In that past life, the future Devadatta and the Bodhisattva were rival junk traders selling pots and pans. In each city, they would divide the streets and decide who would go where first. Then they would separate and call out, "Who wants to buy pots? Who wants to buy pans?" Once in a city, There was a widow living with her daughter who used to be rich but was now very poor. They had a large golden bowl coated with dull copper. These women had no idea of the bowl's true value. When Devadatta appeared at their door, the daughter asked her mother to exchange the bowl for something else. Devadatta, being greedy, immediately recognized that the bowl was worth a fortune, but decided to deceive the poor women. He threw the bowl on the ground, declared it worthless, and left with the intention of returning to buy it for a pittance. Soon after, the Bodhisattva visited the house, and the women hesitantly offered to trade the bowl for something else. The honest Bodhisattva told them the bowl's true value and said he could not afford to pay even a small part of its worth. The women were overjoyed and deeply respected the Bodhisattva for his honesty. They asked him to give them whatever he could. The Bodhisattva gave them all his money and all his pots and pans. With the golden bowl in hand, the Bodhisattva hurried across the river because he guessed Devadatta's intention. After the Bodhisattva left, Devadatta returned to the house. The widow ran out and scolded him for attempting to deceive them. She informed him that another honest scrap dealer had bought the bowl and paid them handsomely. Realizing his failure, Devadatta lamented and became like a madman. He tore his clothes, threw his belongings aside, and chased after the Bodhisattva, shouting that the Bodhisattva had stolen his golden bowl. When he reached the riverbank, he saw the Bodhisattva being ferried across halfway. He loudly called the ferryman to stop, but the Bodhisattva quietly told the ferryman to continue. As the Bodhisattva's figure faded away, Devadatta's hatred surged within him. Hot blood poured from his mouth. His heart burst in two, and he fell down dead. Thus, Devadatta was destroyed by his own dishonest business practices. The Bodhisattva became wealthy from selling the golden bowl he had obtained honestly. He lived the rest of his life doing good deeds and always giving to others. When he passed away, his honesty helped him attain better future lives, eventually leading to Buddhahood. Conversely, Devadatta's unwholesome actions also led him to corresponding future lives. Devadatta continued to oppose and conflict with the Buddha. In the Buddha's final life, after attaining enlightenment, Devadatta even plotted to kill the Buddha. It is said that the earth opened up and he fell into hell. J3. The final question is whether there is any aspect of my job that makes me uncomfortable and my mind is not at peace. If an occupation has passed the first two criteria mentioned, we must consider other aspects that might affect our spiritual progress. This is not simple. Since no job is perfect, each of us must decide which factors are unmanageable. Dishonest colleagues, rude customers, lung-damaging chemicals, products that pollute the environment, indirect associations with companies exploiting labor. In my opinion, the best way to determine if a job is right livelihood is to measure its impact on the mind. For example, a company dumping toxic waste into a river affecting fish and other wildlife. Later, workers in the company learn about this reckless dumping. Two of these workers care deeply about practicing right livelihood. Should they leave their jobs at this company? One worker is filled with disgust at what has happened. His mind repeatedly recalls images from the news about the event. He thinks about the unwholesome nature of those who made the decision, and his mind fills with accusations from his perspective. The second worker continues to work with compassion for those affected, including those responsible for the decision. She hopes that those in power in the company will realize their wrongdoing and take steps to correct and prevent similar issues in the future. This thinking keeps her mind at peace. Some might say both workers should quit because they work for a company with no conscience. Others might argue that only the worker discontent with the company should leave, as the job negatively impacts his mind. We need to use wisdom and understanding of the Buddha's teachings to discern what is right. Ethical principles help us know right from wrong. We do not want to participate in or support unethical actions. Furthermore, ignoring our conscience is also unethical. If we tell ourselves, I cannot change anything and what happens does not affect me personally, we separate ourselves from the global community. The Buddha's teachings on loving kindness advise us to care not only for ourselves and our relatives, but also for our neighbors, community, and everyone. Each of us is just a small, individual cell, but together, with billions of other cells, we become part of the world. Therefore, we have a duty to protect justice. But, and this is very important, in doing so, we must be careful not to harbor ill will or blame others with hatred. Any intentional action, even one intended to correct a wrong, must originate from love and compassion for others and all beings. With this mindset and filled with compassion, we can then act. Returning to the question of whether the two workers at the polluting company should quit their jobs, we cannot draw a quick conclusion. Depending on our spiritual level, leaving might be right or wrong. But one thing is certain, the important thing is always to protect and nurture our wholesome mind. A passive attitude towards evil is not wholesome. However, anger, rage, or hatred is also not wholesome. Even if we decide to quit to maintain right livelihood, quitting with anger does not benefit our spiritual path. We must keep our minds calm, free from hatred, and full of mindfulness. We must always remember that our ultimate goal is to free the mind from all greed, hatred, and delusion. The most profound impact we can make in this world is to face every situation with a clear, compassionate, and loving mind. With a calm and detached mind, we can act or choose not to act, or do anything that best cultivates and manifests our love and compassion. Based on the points mentioned above, it is best for the workers at the polluting company to practice calming their minds. Then, with a clear and calm mind, they can consider their personal and social conditions and decide whether to continue their association with the company. This is the most loving and compassionate action the workers can take. They can consider how significant the event is, whether it is isolated or part of the company's general policy, whether they are directly involved, and whether they can continue working there without feeling too troubled. A sensitive worker, even if not involved in management, might feel more distressed than an indifferent official. If the company's unethical behavior makes the worker uncomfortable, disturbing their peace of mind and focus on work, they must take decisive action. Quitting is just one option. There are many other ways. For example, workers can petition the company to stop the wrongdoing, report the company's activities to the authorities, help the victims, write suggestions to the company on preventing future mistakes, or transfer to another department. If a worker decides to quit, they need not rush. They can start by discreetly exploring other job opportunities. At each stage, they must ask themselves, what can I do to show renunciation, love, compassion, and concern for all beings? What actions can support the inherent goodness of the mind? Beyond ethical concerns of the company, if you have to worry about other issues, the job might not be right livelihood. For instance, a normal job might seem ideal, but it's unacceptable if the boss has a habit of harassment, is always angry, or if many colleagues drink alcohol during lunch, have behind closed doors parties, or use drugs in the workplace. Even if you can maintain your independence in such environments, you must decide if such colleagues affect your mind or hinder your spiritual development. Determining if a job is right livelihood depends on the individual. The same situation might lead one person into unwholesome actions, while another sees it as an opportunity to practice patience and compassion. Following right livelihood. At this point, some may feel disheartened realizing their job isn't right livelihood. They might ask, what should I do now? The answer is there are many options, including ways to change the situation without quitting the job. As mentioned above, you could first try to encourage the company to correct its wrongdoings. If you feel uncomfortable due to the behavior of your colleagues, remember the Buddha's teachings on loving kindness, metta. Love and compassion can conquer even the hardest hearts. It's said that nothing can harm a person full of loving kindness, not even bullets or fire, let alone workplace annoyances. If each day before starting work, you spend a few minutes contemplating loving kindness, who knows what changes might occur? Even those who usually act unwholesomely may change if someone, somewhere, sends them pure, strong, loving kindness daily. Before giving up on a tough job, try this method. Even if your colleagues don't change, your mind will likely become more peaceful. You may begin to feel kindness and compassion towards those who previously annoyed you. However, some jobs or situations are beyond reform, and we must leave them. Sometimes we must sacrifice to follow the Buddha's path. He taught that we shouldn't seek profit through wrongful means, when not for our own gain or others, not for children, wealth, or position, not for profit by wrongful means. Only then is one moral wise and true. For those with special skills or connections, quitting or changing careers may be easy, requiring little sacrifice. But for those with few options, they might fear losing a steady income, especially if they have children to support. However, when it comes to human dignity, we must act. This doesn't mean acting on impulse, but planning carefully with all our ability. Then after planning, act with faith. It's said, those who protect the Dhamma protects. Fad 303. This means that when we rely on what we know in our hearts to be true, everything will turn out well, bringing much happiness. I found this to be true in my life. Here's my story of following right livelihood with full faith. Before founding the Bhavana Society, I was the abbot of a small but well-known temple in Washington, D.C. for 20 years. I had a position in the community, a solid status, an energetic board of directors, friends, and family around me. However, I still dreamed of establishing a meditation center where people could come to learn the Dhamma and meditate. The Buddha always emphasized learning the Dhamma and meditating as the most important things. Yet I saw many people had nowhere to go when they wanted to meditate for a while. My intentions were good and my faith strong. Friends and family advised against it. You hold a high position at the first Theravada temple in America, right in the capital. You shouldn't leave. To some extent, they were right. Leaving Washington, D.C. to establish a meditation center in the countryside was a leap from a respected position to uncertainty. The land my friend Matthew Flickstein and I found for the center was deep in the forests of Western Virginia. The secluded, quiet, serene forest seemed an ideal environment for teaching Dhamma and meditation. The land was beautiful, far from Washington's bustle, but in a conservative Christian area, distant from our supporters. The place was entirely unfamiliar, and we started the center not knowing anyone. Our new society had no members. We didn't know how we would sustain ourselves. Family and friends worried about my meals. Others worried about my safety. But I believed that with good intentions, no matter how conservative the locals, they would see we meant no harm and didn't oppose their religion, and they wouldn't harm us. Soon after buying the land, we eagerly erected a sign by the road reading, Dhamma Village. Soon after, someone altered the sign to read, Damned Village. Later, the sign was taken down. Despite curses and obstacles, we pursued our project. Almost all friends advised against it, and encouragement came from less than 5 people. If anything went wrong, we had no one to help. Friends and family in Washington were 100 miles away. I can't describe all the early difficulties. Even the friend who helped start the center seemed uncertain at times. But faith in the Dhamma protected me. My desire was to spread the Dhamma through teaching and writing, freely available to everyone. As a novice monk, I never accepted offerings for Dhamma talks. As I grew older, I learned that the Buddha forbade selling the Dhamma. He advised, don't be a Dhamma merchant. Over time, things stabilized and we created a meditation center in the forest. Many strange things happened. Unexpected support arrived when we needed it most, and unexpected connections yielded results. Somehow we thrived and grew. Personal experience has taught me that when I follow the peaceful, happy call of my heart, sacrificing for dignity and wholeheartedly pursuing truth, the rewards of right livelihood follow. I also understand that economic conditions can make choices difficult, especially for those with limited or overly specialized skills. What if there's only one industry in the area? If you have many children, elderly parents, or a chronically ill child needing care, and the only convenient job is at a nearby liquor store, what then? Or you live where hunting and fishing are necessary for survival. What does right livelihood mean for those in harsh economic conditions or forced by the powerful into illegal activities like growing drugs? If you're in such situations, take comfort knowing that when you don't intend to harm, you're not responsible for harmful outcomes you're not directly causing. A story from the Buddha's time illustrates this. The daughter of a wealthy businessman had heard the Dhamma and reached the first stage of enlightenment. One day, a handsome ivory trader passed through her village and she fell in love. Without a word to her family, she followed him home and they married. As the hunter's wife, she had to clean and prepare his hunting gear. She performed these duties dutifully. They had 7 children, and eventually, their children also married. Right livelihood. One day when the Buddha observed the world with his divine eye, he saw that this entire family could be enlightened, so he visited them. The Buddha first went to an empty trap set by the hunter. He left his footprint beside the trap and waited behind a bush. When the hunter arrived and saw the empty trap with footprints next to it, he thought someone had stolen his prey. Seeing the Buddha by the bush, he aimed his bow and arrow at the Buddha, but became immobile in that position. His 7 children came looking for their father, and seeing him standing there with his bow drawn but unable to move, they also aimed their bows at the Buddha and became immobile. Finally, the wife came looking for the whole family. She saw everyone aiming their arrows at the Buddha and cried out, spreading her arms, "Don't kill my father." When her family heard these words, they thought the man must be her father whom they had never met. The husband thought, "This is my wife's father." The children thought, "This is our grandfather." Their hearts filled with love for this man, and they lowered their weapons and greeted him. The Buddha then gave them a sermon, and they all attained the first stage of meditation. When the Buddha returned to the monastery, his disciples were very surprised and asked, "How could this be? How could this woman prepare bows and traps to help kill animals if she understood the Dhamma?" The Buddha explained that the woman did not participate in the killing of animals. Furthermore, she did not want to harm animals. She was simply fulfilling her duty as the hunter's wife. The Buddha further explained, "A hand without a wound can touch poison without harm. No wound, poison cannot penetrate. So it is with a pure mind." Blood 24. Just as a hand without a wound can touch poison without danger, so wrongful actions cannot affect us if we do not intentionally perform them. Although the hunter's wife prepared the hunting tools, she did so out of obedience to her husband, as in that culture and time, a wife had little choice in such matters. Her lack of intention to harm protected her mind from negative consequences. Since she did not wish to harm animals, her actions were innocent. If you feel your means of livelihood are not good, but have no other way to support yourself and your family, you can keep your current job while gradually looking for a better one. In the meantime, practice loving kindness, send love to all those who may be affected by your work, and keep your mind pure by maintaining your intention on wholesome deeds. If we accept right livelihood as our goal, we can gradually move towards it as our spiritual practice progresses. Ultimately, our work should bring mental comfort to everyone involved, as our actions affect others. I know a couple who run a family business making beautiful wooden toys that are especially safe for children. They then expanded their business to underprivileged communities, creating jobs for many people. Instead of requiring workers to work in a factory, they provided materials, trained them, and allowed workers to make toys at home, paying them per product. This method allowed workers to focus their lives around their families and work or rest as they pleased. Sometimes people ask me, how can I find a job according to right livelihood? Since the age of 12, I have had only one job, being a monk. I'm not the best person to help you choose a profession or find a job. However, I can say this, finding right livelihood is like starting any major new task. Don't make it too important. Just take it one step at a time. Mindfulness of right livelihood. Accepting that our work is an aspect of our spiritual practice is not easy. Many people separate their work from their spiritual life. However, when we sit down to meditate and reflect on our past actions, we must acknowledge that our work is indeed our action, even if it is done under orders or job requirements. Lying is still lying, even if we are paid to do it. We are responsible for what we say or do, both in this life and in the future. Therefore, we must uphold ethics in our work as we do in other actions. As with right speech and right action, right livelihood requires us to always purify our actions, whether at home or at work. Even if our job is considered right livelihood, each working day we must remain mindful of ethical issues as they arise. We must be clearly aware of the 5 precepts and carefully guard against breaking them. Ethical issues outside of the 5 precepts require us to consider whether we can bear the consequences of those actions. As our mindfulness meditation practice progresses, we may become more patient and calm in situations we previously found intolerable, and we can be content with any honest work. The most important thing to remember is that our work should not hinder our spiritual progress. When we do not harm ourselves by breaking precepts or engaging in unethical activities, our minds will be peaceful and free. With a peaceful and free mind, we can naturally progress on the spiritual path. When obstacles are removed, we just need to keep moving forward. This can be compared to how we sustain ourselves. When hungry, we eat. When thirsty, we drink. We wear warm clothes when it's cold. We prevent illness. We avoid actions and situations that endanger our bodies. But we do not proclaim, "I must live, I must live." If we have provided the basic necessities, the body will automatically sustain life. Similarly, in right livelihood, our sole responsibility is to avoid harming ourselves and others so that we can maintain a peaceful and pure mind. With a free mind, we can meditate and progress on the path to happiness, following the footsteps of the Buddha. If we want to advance faster, we can look for jobs or careers that cultivate and support our practice, encouraging us to be more diligent. Such work will create situations that challenge our shortcomings, allowing us to improve without creating excessive pressure and avoiding issues we are not yet ready to handle. For example, someone trying to cultivate more refined states of concentration might find suitable work in stable, easy tasks that do not require much mental effort. Conversely, someone cultivating patience might thrive in a job that involves dealing with difficult people or challenging situations. During meditation, take some time to apply the 3-tiered self-inquiry method mentioned earlier to assess how your current job contributes to right livelihood. From there, you can decide if any improvements are needed. Ask yourself what you can do to make your work more beneficial for yourself and others. Summary of right livelihood. Here are the key points to remember about right livelihood. Our means of livelihood should not negatively impact our spiritual development. We can evaluate whether a job is right livelihood using a 3-tiered assessment method. At the first level, we consider whether the job is inherently harmful to others or ourselves. At the second level, we examine whether the job requires us to break any of the 5 precepts. Finally, we consider whether other factors related to the job make it difficult for our minds to be at peace. Loving kindness can positively influence a challenging work environment. If we do not intend to harm anyone, our minds will not be tainted by the negative consequences of our work. Right livelihood is the ultimate goal to achieve as our spiritual practice progresses. Thank you for listening. If you found this video helpful, please share it with those who might benefit from it. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button, follow, and turn on the notification bell. This is how you can show your support for me. Once again, thank you very much, and see you in the next videos. Hello everyone, welcome to Mind Podcast Buddhism. Today we'll explore the intriguing topic, where are the limits of the desire realm, the Buddhist cosmology. Let's dive into the depths of Buddhist teachings to understand the nature and boundaries of our desires within the vast framework of the universe. Where are the limits of the desire realm? The Buddhist cosmology. Buddhism views sexuality through the lens of craving and suffering. It is a peril that drives people into the abyss of desire and anguish. Behind the body and gender lies the craving. Buddhism does not impose any rules on human society, does not legislate, nor establish a collective morality. Buddhism focuses on the individual, advising people on how to live and practice to eradicate suffering and liberate themselves from the bonds of existence. Therefore, the teachings of the Buddha, 5th century BCE, regarding sexuality are personal advice, not commandments imposed on all of humanity. According to traditional Theravada Buddhist teachings, sexuality, like all things related to the body and pleasure derived from sensory perceptions, is viewed in terms of craving and attachment arising from desire. Suffering inevitably arises from these feelings. Sexuality is often highlighted as a danger or a slippery ground that pushes people into the misery of desire and suffering. The law of impermanence. The Buddha emphasized the concept of the Four Noble Truths as the foundation of his teachings. These truths first stress the pervasive and unavoidable nature of suffering, the first truth. The Buddha then explains the origin of suffering, the second truth, which is craving, including the excessive desire for sexual pleasures and the constant search for those pleasures, even the desire for annihilation and non-existence. Why does Buddhism condemn craving? Because it views craving as a product of ignorance, meaning not understanding oneself and the true nature of one's existence. This ignorance fosters a sense of a permanent self, reinforced by memories, habits, familiar feelings, and especially attachment to one's body. However, all these are transient. Hence, to counteract this transience, people try to reinforce the sense of a permanent self by increasing sensory pleasures and always looking toward the future. Unfortunately, this effort to extend and protect the self is futile, as the law of impermanence is inescapable. Aging, illness, and death are ever-present reminders of impermanence. Sexuality is directly linked to bodily sensations, yet the body is a product of past karma, the result of one's previous actions. The body is often likened to a precious vehicle, a means to enlightenment, but it is also described as a burden or the cause of lust and other worries, hindering one's spiritual life. Are these two views contradictory? Not at all. Difficulties arise from one's attachment to the body, not from the body itself. The body, through its five senses, perceives contact resulting in sensations, whether pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Thus, the body itself is merely a gateway for sensory inputs. Among these, sexual sensation is one of the most pleasurable that the body can provide. There is nothing wrong with experiencing pleasure if it doesn't lead to excessive craving and attachment, wanting more pleasure. The problem arises from our reaction to pleasure, not the pleasure itself. The craving for pleasure and the desire to continue experiencing it is the true cause of suffering. This craving and desire give rise to a series of desires: possession, jealousy, anger, resentment, that torment and blind us. These desires are the root of sin. But where do these sins come from? From our own minds. The key point in Buddhist teachings is that the body is subject to the control of the mind. The body and sexual pleasure do not play an active role. It is the mind's attachment that triggers all forms of desire, which in turn cause suffering. Craving is the primary driver of reactions within the mind. Although the word desire in Western languages reflects the meaning of the Sanskrit word raga quite accurately, it is crucial to understand that in Buddhism, raga, desire, craving, does not carry the positive connotation that the word desire might have in Western contexts. Scriptures define raga as the desire attachment, meaning the strong attachment to existence and possessions, and the craving arising from these. Its effect is the emergence of all kinds of suffering. This definition highlights the cautionary aspect of desire. In Western thought, desire is often seen as a motivating force that can lead to creativity and noble qualities, such as the desire of heaven or an artist's creative drive, but it can also be a force driving one into the suffering of lust. Thus, the meaning of desire in Western languages is ambiguous. For example, the desire for love can be seen as encouraging, even though the consequences of such desire can sometimes be destructive. Buddhist teachings focus on analysis and consider desire attachment as a mental toxin. However, Buddhism also acknowledges a different form of craving, called desire craving, similar to the motivating desire in Western contexts. Sexuality itself is not to blame. It is the mind that must be held accountable when it is blinded by pleasure and becomes fertile ground for mental toxins. Sexuality, as an interaction between two individuals, provides an opportunity for mutual reception. Only when possessiveness, excessive craving, and the desire for satisfaction enter does sexuality become selfish and lead to suffering. This is the core message of Buddhism. Buddhism is not concerned with lineage or marriage, as these are merely forms of bondage in life, relationships between people, and physiological control. In Buddhism, marriage is not sacred and does not require rituals for blessings. Buddhist teachings demand mutual respect, sacrifice for one another, and non-violence. Buddhism does not consider the body and the world as inherently evil. The Buddha advocates the middle way, rejecting all forms of asceticism and self-mortification. meaning maintaining a balance between the secular life and the severity of asceticism, which only further torments the body without bringing liberation. Understanding one's duties is maintaining sexual morality. Marriage is not about possession. For those who have not fully grasped the doctrine, sexual life becomes the main driving force of suffering in the cycle of existence, samsara, from which Buddhism seeks liberation. Based on this view, lay Buddhists must respect themselves and others, and monks and nuns who have renounced worldly life must completely avoid sexual activities. However, Mahayana Buddhism seems more open compared to the strictness of Theravada Buddhism. In the Tantric school, sexuality is transformed into a form of yogic practice and is seen as a method to achieve enlightenment. Overall, Buddhism maintains a very liberal attitude towards sexuality. The path of renunciation. The role of Buddhism regarding sexuality depends on the context and the level of understanding of the Dharma by the Buddhist practitioner. The rules and precepts recorded in the scriptures are considered to be directly derived from the teachings of the Buddha. Thus, they are generally applied to all sects except for a few exceptions in Japanese Buddhism. In Japan, the observance of precepts for monastics is rarely upheld, and today, some monks have families and are both monastics and scholars. In the Vinaya Pitaka, the Code of Monastic Discipline, there is a section called the Pratamoksha, the Individual Liberation Vow, that details the rules for lay people, novices, and fully ordained monks and nuns. Lay Buddhists can vow to observe 5 precepts, 3 of which relate to the body: not taking life, not taking what is not given, and not engaging in sexual misconduct. The exact wording of the 3rd precept is, I undertake the precept to refrain from sexual misconduct. Respecting oneself and others. No one in society is forced to adhere to these precepts, but once one vows to observe them, they must be strictly maintained. Observing these precepts is a personal action, a voluntary act. Buddhism does not prescribe specific sexual conduct to prohibit, except for actions that cause suffering to others. In Asia, the precepts related to sexuality are more clearly defined than elsewhere, such as the prohibition of adultery. However, this is merely a way to limit the broad nature of the sexual precept, which essentially teaches respect for oneself and others. This precept does not specifically mention homosexuality, and indeed, homosexuality is quite easily accepted in Southeast Asian countries. However, sexual acts are strictly prohibited in monasteries. This prohibition is regulated depending on 2 stages of monastic training, the novice stage and the fully ordained monk stage. Both male and female novices must observe 10 precepts, including maintaining celibacy, abstinence, not engaging in sexual lewd or impure acts. Once fully ordained, monastics are officially considered to have left the household life, and they are called bhikkhus, monks, or bhikkhunis, nuns. They must adopt a simple and austere lifestyle, a path of determination to renounce the secular world. On this path, they must eliminate all negative actions and cultivate a virtuous state of mind, focusing their energy on studying and practicing the Dharma, the path. Complete celibacy is one of the 4 fundamental precepts they must observe, and any violation results in immediate and permanent expulsion from the monastic community. However, there are less stringent precepts. For example, there are 13 serious offenses that, if violated, result in temporary expulsion from the monastic community. Among these offenses are masturbation, intentionally ejaculating, physical contact or touching women, speaking lewd or suggestive words, inciting a woman to prostitution, or acting as a matchmaker. However, nocturnal emissions during sleep are not considered a violation. If a monastic harbors desires for women, they must immediately meditate on the impurity of the body, as referenced in additional texts. If unable to control their desires, they must seek to suspend their vows and return to lay life before any irreversible situation arises, i.e., permanent expulsion. Acting in this way, they will not be criticized. Conversely, if a monastic fails to resist temptation within the monastery, they will be expelled from the monastic community according to the precepts. For female monastics, the rules are similar, with little difference. However, in cases where a nun is raped against her will and without any voluntary pleasure, it is not considered a major violation and can be forgiven. Although Theravada Buddhism strictly prohibits sexuality, Social life in Theravada Buddhist Southeast Asian countries is not overly harsh if sexual conduct is not violent and does not cause suffering to others through adultery. Additional texts for reading. The renunciation of the Bodhisattva before becoming the Buddha. While listening to the musicians playing to pass the time, the Bodhisattva, the future Buddha, fell asleep. The entire troupe also fell asleep from exhaustion. Suddenly, the Bodhisattva woke up to see the musicians still there, leaning against each other, with their clothes disheveled, resembling wooden statues, their noses running, eyes swollen as if they were crying, drooling from their mouths, with instruments scattered on the ground. The Bodhisattva was horrified to see the entire palace resembling a graveyard and exclaimed 3 times, "Unfortunate, unfortunate, I must leave this place." Previously, the Bodhisattva had been attached to the palace where his father resided, but now it appeared to him in this way. Feeling disgusted, the Bodhisattva exclaimed, "Unfortunate." And from the depths of his heart arose the desire to renounce everything. A corpse is truly repulsive. The body of the living is no better. A yogi should see the body as something terrifying, and always remember this. There are 32 repulsive aspects concerning color, shape, smell, location, and distribution, the objects of sensory perception. The excretions from the body are repulsive and filthy. The components supporting the body are the same. Like a maggot born from filth, the body is formed from dirt. Inside, it is filled with impurities like a cesspool. Impurities seep out like oil through a clay pot. The body is a den of worms, no different from a heap of trash. The body is like a boil, a disease, or an incurable ulcer. Repulsive and weak, no better than a corpse. A few sexual precepts for monastics. First, parajika. In Chinese scriptures, the term parajika is translated as great precept, meaning the most important prohibitions. No sexual intercourse. If a bhikkhu monk inserts his sexual organ into the sexual organ, anus, or mouth of another person, whether man or woman, or inserts the sexual organ of another into his own mouth or anus, or inserts his sexual organ into the sexual organ, anus, or mouth of an animal or a corpse, even as deep as the length of a sesame seed, the bhikkhu will lose his status as a monastic. Even if the bhikkhu wraps his sexual organ in cloth, places it in a bag, dresses as a layperson, or is naked, and does not feel any pleasure, he still loses his monastic status. The following 10 situations do not constitute a serious offense. When the bhikkhu is asleep and completely unaware that intercourse is occurring. When he is not complicit. When he is unconscious or insane. In cases of possession by spirits and cannot control himself, or if the actions occurred before taking the vows. First, sanghadisa. Sanghadisesa are offenses that must be brought before the monastic community for adjudication and result in temporary expulsion. No intentional ejaculation. If a bhikkhu masturbates or has someone else masturbate him to the point of ejaculation, he must be brought before the monastic community. The bhikkhu should not intentionally treasure his sexual organ, use it as a tool, or let it hang loose. If he ejaculates even a tiny amount sufficient for a fly to drink, it constitutes a sanghadisesa offense. However, nocturnal emissions during sleep are not considered an offense. If semen is accidentally discharged while defecating, it is not considered an offense. If a bit of semen leaks out while cleaning the sexual organ or applying medicine, and he does not feel any pleasure, it is not considered an offense. Fourth, sandadisa, no propositioning a woman for sex. If a monastic thinks of lust and crudely suggests sexual intercourse to a woman, with himself or another, he must be brought before the monastic community. If a monastic tells a woman that any girl who wants to be reborn under favorable conditions must offer herself to him, he commits the fourth sandadisesa offense. The position of Mahayana between rigidity and transgressions. The precepts outlined in Theravada Buddhism continue to be respected by Mahayana sects. Monastics must adhere to the Vinaya, and lay Buddhists must follow the 5 precepts. However, for a bodhisattva, enlightened being acting with compassion for the benefit of others, the bodhisattva is a unique concept in Mahayana Buddhism. Their ethical framework transcends the confines of monastic rules, as prescribed by Theravada Buddhism, and this ethical framework also applies to lay Buddhists. This moral code is closely related to the internal motivations behind actions rather than external impositions, giving it a more flexible nature while still being governed by specific, clear rules. This flexibility in some cases allows bodhisattvas to act more effectively for the benefit of sentient beings. Therefore, the Vinayas rules also become more lenient for them. The emptiness of sexuality. In general, the provisions regarding sexuality prescribed for monastics in Mahayana scriptures are fundamentally based on the Vinaya of Theravada Buddhism, continuing to uphold the high ideal of a life detached from worldly matters. Shantideva, in his Bodhicharyavatara, The Way of the Bodhisattva, harshly criticizes the seductive nature of the female body, comparing it to a sack filled with impure and filthy substances. For a female monastic, the male body is viewed similarly. The ethics designated for bodhisattvas are more liberal and free, though still regulated by certain specific rules. This freedom is sometimes necessary in certain situations to benefit sentient beings. In China, the Brahmajala Sutra, Brahma's Net Sutra, mentions that bodhisattvas must abstain from sexual activity, but if they violate this, they are not expelled from the monastic community, but must confess and sincerely repent. The Vimalakirti Nirdesa Sutra narrates the story of a lay bodhisattva, not a monastic, who exemplifies two different attitudes towards the body, avoiding attachment to the illusory body but also using it as a means to help others see the path of Dharma, even utilizing sexuality if necessary. Another passage recounts an interesting story about a female deity teaching Sariputra the emptiness of gender. See the additional reading excerpts. Complete emptiness helps bodhisattvas transcend the confines of bodily gender, provided they achieve genuine spiritual results, not just theoretical concepts, and especially if they eliminate all attachment to the illusion of reality. Legends of crazy monks transcending their prescribed precepts. When Buddhism spread to China in the 1st century, it marked a new turning point, especially in Zen, Chan Buddhism. Zen focuses on realizing the illusory nature of desires rather than rigidly adhering to precepts. However, this does not mean disregarding the Vinaya, but emphasizing the importance of mind's functioning over the constraints of literal words. Legends tell of many crazy monks who transcended the boundaries of their prescribed precepts. For instance, the monk Ji Gong, whose name means true person, was seen by contemporaries as a drunkard and libertine. Another monk, Wonyo, 607–6686 from Korea, was a profound scholar who authored many treatises and commentaries on sutras, but he did not adhere strictly to precepts and frequented pleasure districts. He later married a princess and had a son before living as a wandering monk spreading Pure Land Buddhism of Amitabha Buddha. In Japan, the Vinaya's precepts for monastics were not strictly observed. In the 9th century, the great master Saicho, founder of the Tendai school, replaced the Vinaya's monastic precepts with the Bodhisattva vows. Consequently, monastics in this sect did not strictly follow the Vinaya's precepts. In Zen Buddhism, a form of Chinese Chan, Dogen advocated simplifying the 10 precepts for monastics but insisted on strict celibacy within the monastery. However, this did not prevent the monk Ikkyu, 1394–1481, from renouncing monastic life. He was a highly liberal Zen master who composed many humorous and licentious poems criticizing homosexuality in monasteries. In the Pure Land school, Honen was a true monk, but his disciple Shinran was married and founded the Jodo Shinshu sect, where monks typically had families. More accurately, they were lay people with families rather than monks with families, as noted by the translator. Finally, during the Meiji era, 1868–1912, monks were required to adopt a fixed lifestyle, necessitating marriage to continue the family line to maintain the temples built by their families. Additional reading excerpts. The Bodhisattva uses the bait of desire, the suffering of lust. You seek the pleasures of sexual desire and enjoy them as a form of happiness, but the disease of lust only worsens. You seek what lies outside, i.e. the body of a woman, but the more you seek, the more intense your suffering becomes. It is akin to someone with scabies. This person heats their hand near the fire or scratches to relieve the itch, but this only makes their hand burn more. During that moment of scratching or bringing the hand near the fire, one might find some relief, lightness, less itching, but in the long run the pain penetrates deeper into the skin. The small pleasure of lust is similar, serving only as the cause of a disease. scabies digging deeper into the skin. It is neither true happiness nor a cure for the disease. Anyone who sees a person with scabies being treated in such a way will pity them. Similarly, someone who has renounced pleasure will react to lust. When this person sees a madman consumed by desire, they will pity him, for the more he pursues pleasure, the more he suffers. Based on the reasons just mentioned, understand that the body has the nature of suffering and is also the source of suffering. Mind without gender, Sariputra asked the female deity, "O deity, why don't you change your gender, since you are only a woman? For 12 years I have been searching for the attributes of a woman, but I have not seen them clearly. So, what should I change? For example, if a magician creates an illusory woman and asks her why she does not change her gender, would that request be correct or incorrect?" Sariputra replied, "Indeed, it is incorrect. An illusory creation does not possess distinct attributes that allow it to truly transform." The female deity then said, "Just like that, all phenomena lack distinct attributes, so why do you ask me why I do not change my body?" Immediately, the female deity used her power to switch forms with Sariputra, turning herself into Sariputra and Sariputra into herself, then asked Sariputra, who was in her form, "Now, why don't you change your gender?" Sariputra, seeing his ridiculous form, exclaimed, "I don't know if the transformation has truly occurred, but before my eyes I have become a woman." The female deity replied, "Sariputra, if you can change your gender, then all women can do the same. Sariputra, if you are not a woman but only possess the outward appearance of one, then all women are the same, only possessing the outward appearance of men. Therefore, the Buddha said that all phenomena do not possess male or female attributes." Then the female deity used her power to return Sariputra to his original form and asked, "Where is your female grace now?" "I have no female grace, and it is not found anywhere else. It is the same with all phenomena. They do not exist anywhere, nor do they exist anywhere else." This is what the Buddha taught. The Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva is very sensitive to the objects of the senses. But the Bodhisattva is also highly skilled in the art of focusing the mind. Thus, the Bodhisattva confounds the Mara demons, preventing them from causing chaos. It is wonderful when lotus flowers bloom in the red flame. But it is even more wonderful when focusing the mind amid the encirclement of desire. To some people, the Bodhisattva appears as a prostitute, only because the Bodhisattva wants to attract those captivated by lust. The Bodhisattva entices these people with the bait of desire before guiding them back to the wisdom of the Buddhas. Tantric Buddhism and sexuality. For a long time, there have been numerous misunderstandings and prejudices about Tantric Buddhism. First, Westerners often hastily view Tantric Buddhism as merely a technique applied in spiritual practice. In reality, Tantric Buddhism, also known as Vajrayana, directly derives from Mahayana and represents a comprehensive path to attaining Buddhahood. Tantric Buddhism is far more than a simple technique for liberating oneself from sexuality. The symbol of sexuality in Tantric Buddhism aims to illustrate the inseparable union of opposing forces within the mind, the universe, and reality. Thus, male deities in Tantric Buddhism symbolize skillful means in spiritual practice, while female deities represent wisdom or the understanding of emptiness, which validates the results achieved by these methods. In the spiritual realm, the polarized nature of sexuality indicates that the method, male aspect, can become highly dangerous if not directed towards expansion. Similarly, phenomena in the universe, male aspect, can only unfold within the open space, female aspect, that serves as the receptive foundation for these phenomena. Purification of consequences. The enlightened nature of the mind, which is the open space, female aspect, welcomes and integrates clarity, male aspect. The primary symbols of Vajrayana include the Vajra, a diamond scepter representing the male aspect, and the Gantar, a small bell representing the female aspect or universal polarity. The symbols of Buddhas depicted as the union of male and female deities do not imply indulgence, even if they are imbued with a sacred character. Regarding carnal sexuality in Japan, the orthodox Shingon and Tendai schools completely exclude tantric texts containing explicit symbols. In these schools, sexual symbols are presented very discreetly, with male and female deities placed side by side. These symbols are used as a technique to purify the effects and polluted perceptions of reality. However, in the 12th century, there was a deviant Shingon sect known as Tachikawa Ryu, which advocated using the blissful state of sexual union for achieving enlightenment. Taoism was more heavily influenced by these heretical interpretations of Tantric Buddhism, attracting many followers and flourishing greatly. Buddhist monks from various sects opposed this heresy in Taoism, leading to its prohibition in Japan in the 14th century, and Taoist texts were burned. In India and Tibet, tantric practices are deeply internal, allowing sexual symbols to be more explicitly displayed. However, union with a consort can only be considered a practice of enlightenment if the yogi has reached a very high level, with a solid foundation in understanding emptiness, developed compassion, mastery of visualization, mantra recitation, and yogic techniques of energy control. Viewing the use of sexuality as merely a technique for eliminating attachment to the mundane misses the essence of tantric practice. Therefore, it is not surprising that sexuality is used as a transformative means. Tantric Buddhism is a path advocating transformation, enabling practitioners to convert mental poisons into wisdom through powerful yogic methods. While ordinary worldly sexuality manifests desire and clinging to pleasure, Tantric Buddhism sanctifies this state, seeing it as an opportunity to experience bliss and completely replace the coarse state of mind with the pure state of the luminous clear light. Typically, this clear light only manifests at death, but mastery of sexual union can create a state similar to the mind leaving the body. Through yogic practices of short death and darkness of pleasure giving way to the dawn of the clear light, the yogi and the consort can achieve the awakening experienced at death. This is one of many examples highlighting how sexual energy aligns with the energy of death. A few words of advice. Buddhism uses a method of analysis to approach reality. This analysis moves in two different directions. One direction involves dissecting phenomena to their utmost limit, revealing their emptiness. The other direction involves a broad perspective that encompasses all phenomena, helping to observe the nature and universal laws that govern their operations, such as the principle of interdependence, pratitya-samutpada, the principle of impermanence, and the law of cause and effect. The articles above present some results derived from these methods of analysis and demonstrate that Buddhism does not seek to directly address the harmful effects of sexuality, nor does it blame the body as the basis for the emergence of lust. Instead, Buddhism analyzes further to show that all suffering and chaos are the consequences of attachment in the mind. Theravada Buddhism aims to prevent the harmful effects of sexuality through strict precepts and remedies. Mahayana Buddhism also uses precepts to limit the impact of sexuality, but simultaneously seeks to transcend sexuality, offering more flexibility in the ethical discipline of bodhisattvas, whether ordained or lay, to help them act more effectively. Tantric Buddhism, however, adopts a completely different approach by directly utilizing the energy of sexuality to guide practitioners toward enlightenment. Today, with the advancements in science, philosophy, sociology, etc., we have gained a richer understanding. Can this understanding contribute to Buddhism's goal of guiding us to a deeper comprehension of sexuality and its impacts, helping to limit its harmful and chaotic effects on society and individuals? To answer this question, let's analyze the causes of sexual impulses from a different perspective, beyond the physical and mental levels, by considering the concept of instinct. Indeed, we are constantly driven by various instincts. Among them, three primary instincts exert the most powerful influence: the desire to eat, the desire for sex, and the fear of death. The desire to eat is an expression of the survival instinct, leading to the protection of food, banks, money, wealth, competition, fraud, greed, stinginess, weapons, wars, robbery, wealth, poverty, excess. The desire for sex is the reproductive instinct, giving rise to jealousy, infatuation, heartbreak, happiness, sorrow, complexes, violence, suicide, imprisonment. This instinct manifests in myriad forms such as makeup, clothing, perfume, sentimental poetry, romantic music, pornography, romantic novels. The fear of death is the self-preservation instinct, leading to the development of various philosophies, religions, medicine, drugs, magic, immortality, elixirs, the creation of various paradises, all aiming to ensure continued existence in any form. In summary, the world of phenomena is incredibly complex. However, if we trace back the causes of phenomena, this tumultuous world is not that complicated. The instincts to eat, to reproduce, and to fear death affect, control, and drive all living beings, from humans and animals to insects and tiny creatures. In short, all sentient beings. The impact of these instincts creates attachment and bondage, leading to suffering. Where do these instincts come from? From fundamental ignorance, also known as primordial ignorance, which binds sentient beings to the cycle of existence. Being born as a human, we carry human instincts. Being born as an animal, we carry animal instincts. Personal karma adds diversity to all sentient beings. When we become aware that instincts are controlling and dominating us, we naturally seek to limit their influence to find freedom and liberation for ourselves. Simply put, if we have enough to eat, we do not need to be greedy, robbed, or wage wars to protect or accumulate wealth. If we wish to reproduce, we should look at the nearly 7 billion people suffering on this planet. If we fear death, it is futile because it is inevitable. Specifically regarding sexual instincts, Buddhist teachings have anticipated precepts to restrain and remedies to mitigate their impact. The precepts in Theravada Buddhism, such as those concerning the intentional or accidental emission of semen, might seem overly detailed or at least formalistic and attachment-prone. Mahayana Buddhism shows more leniency towards bodhisattvas, but one must be a bodhisattva to enjoy such leniency in precepts. The expansion of Tantric Buddhism is quite limited compared to other schools. The number of advanced practitioners who can harness the power of sexuality on the path to enlightenment is extremely rare. Practitioners can look to the example of the Dalai Lama, who practices Tantric Buddhism but is entirely celibate.